Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT ranked meta video. Our analysts are here to go through the ranked meta for patch 12.4b. After a rough start, the mid-set is in full swing now and the B patch has smoothed out a few of the rough edges. We'll be breaking down what meta changes have occurred since the B patch as well as our usual breakdown of each stage of the game. With that, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. To start off with, let's talk about the 12.4 meta and what changed with the B patch. There's been a lot of talk about the first patch of the mid-set with high-ranked players pointing out potential problems with the new champions, traits, and augments. While it is important to take note of what they say, it's also worth keeping in mind the first patch of a new set or mid-set is always going to be a mess. It's definitely been the case for Neon Knights as the balance was all over the place initially. Specifically champions like Silco, Rek'Sai, and traits like Hextech. Those types of compositions were taking over the meta with the bulk of players rolling on 7 to hit a good 4 cost or going 8 to find a fast Silco. Silco in particular has been a nightmare to play against and a blessing to have on your board even after the B patch. But before being nerfed, he was definitely way overtuned. Rek'Sai also had this issue in the early stages of the game, as being a strong 3-trait 2 cost meant players that found Rek'Sai and Sejuani early had a huge board advantage. By far, the trait with the most issues in 12.4 was Hextech, as the shield and bonus magic damage helped players stabilize easily in stage 2, 3, and 4. Then there was Renata Bruiser, but the composition hasn't gone away just yet, which leads us to our follow-up section. What is the current 12.4b meta? Things are still settling post-B patch, but the meta has shifted more towards reroll builds than late-game boards for sure. Talon Debonair dominated the first few days along with Enchanter reroll, Twitch Innovator, and a few others like Tryndamere. But it's worth keeping in mind a lot of the time those types of builds are just reactions to nerfs. As it turns out, Silco is still quite good. Probably the best all-around solo champion in the game even after the nerfs. Because Silco is still good, the meta has shifted partially back towards 4 and 5 cost unit boards like Renata Bruiser. There's definitely a missing piece to the meta with Hextech being weaker, but it is still playable. Overall, if we took a snapshot of the meta right now, it would be a mixture of low-cost boards focusing on rerolling with a few high-cost boards sprinkled in utilizing Silco. Oh, and innovators are still busted if you ever hit 7 of them, but that's just stock standard part of set 6 in general. And honestly, there being a good mixture of compositions is good. This means the meta is diverse, though flex play seems to be suffering a bit. While 12.5 certainly still needs to address some issues, it does seem like the B patch helped quite a bit. With that preamble out of the way, we can move into the different stages of the game, beginning with the opening carousel and in the early game. Item priority. Where is it now that the dust has settled slightly? It comes down a lot to player preference because what you're likely to play affects the priority. For example, AP boards either need a tier or rod, but AP isn't generally something you force right out of the gate because Arcanists are struggling. Flexing with Orianna or Seraphine carry later on is great for AP, but that's not really something you expect to land on in stage 1 and 2. That leaves generic auto attack items like Infinity Edge and Giant Slayer. Due to that, sword is still likely the best opening component for the majority of boards simply because a lot of champions in the meta can utilize either of those items. Giant Slayer in particular gets a lot of value since common frontlines still lean heavily towards bruisers. But as we said, player preference matters a lot here, so if you're looking to play adaptively, a sword or tier is a safe opener. If you want to look for a more aggressive and potential win streak opener, then rod, chain vest, bow, or glove is the way to go. Belt has its uses, but most of the time it won't do much for you with the exception of slamming an early Sunfire cape, and Dragon's Claw is not a terrible component later on in the game, but it won't do too much for you early on. All in all, items are in a good spot for set 6 because there's a lot of flexibility between the various item holders. Sure, there are some best in slot items for specific champions, but in general you can get away with X, Y, and Z items and find some champion that can use them effectively. Let's continue on into stage 1, where not much is new in Neon Knights. Continue looking for the classic pairs to 2-star and make gold if possible. There are a few openers to look out for, such as Scrap Innovators, Yordles, and Bruisers, but those specific openers only matter if you're 2-starring the champions. It's worth pointing out that even though Hextech was nerfed, it still has solid champions and the trait bonus itself is still fine in stage 2. Just don't expect it to scale well beyond that. More important decision is of course the one for Augment. Augments in Neon Knights kinda go hard as quite a few of them make the early game hard to predict. It's no longer just enough to have a strong board, you also need a strong Augment. There's two ways to look at choosing your Augment, either picking one for more board strength, the Combat Augment, or trying to scale your economy faster with an Eco Augment. Not every Augment is broken down into those two categories, but utility is generally preferable later on in the game. Early game is all about playing to win streak or aiming for good economy. The best choice is incredibly dependent upon what tier of augment it is, whether econ orbs have dropped yet, and if you've hit any 2-star units. There are a few augments that immediately boost your board's value, such as True 2's Backfoot, Luden's Echo, Electrocharge, or Jeweled Lotus. But again, it really does come down to player preference and what you scout other players taking as their augment. What we recommend is assessing the situation based on the players in your lobby. Do a lot of them look like they have a better stage 1 board than you, or do a lot of them have combat augments? Maybe take the econ augment and lose streak to scale into stage 3 and 4. If your board is looking decent and there's a potential combat augment, take it and aim to push your board advantage with early levels and win streaking. Speaking of pushing levels, let's move into stage 2. At this stage, you either want to be playing a cohesive board to try and win streak, or you're not leveling and playing for economy and preserving health if possible. Yordles and Mercenaries are still great for lose streaking, though keep in mind you may drop down quickly in health, so only play this style if you're comfortable from playing behind in the mid game. With the new in-game combat tracker, there's no reason to not be scouting constantly to squeeze out any advantage you can with positioning. This is great for both styles of play, but especially if you want to win. Keep in mind the first few rounds will basically be random, but the further into stage 2 the game goes, the more likely you have an idea of who you're likely to face in the next round. Another thing to do for winning rounds is pushing levels. Hit level 4 on 2-1, and if your board is definitely one of the strongest, you can aim to level again on 2-3 to 5. This can be a risk if you lose, so we only recommend doing it after scouting and having a good grasp on how strong your board is relative to the others. The rest of stage 2 plays out normally with your goals remaining the same. Ideally, you want to have a 5-win streak or 5-loss streak going into Krugs. If not, you may need to suffer some extra losses in stage 3 to fix your econ. Into the mid game with stage 3 we go. The goal for stage 3 is dependent upon the lobby and what composition your board is leaning towards. With a lot of reroll happening, the pace of the game may shoot up quickly if a lot of players are rolling at level 5 or 6. In that case, you either want to roll to stabilize to lose less health, or take the hits and aim for a stronger board in stage 4. If you're the one rerolling, focus on hitting as quickly as you can so your power spikes happen first. It's also important to keep scouting in case others are contesting your comp. The major decision of this stage is the 3-3 augment. A lot of players will say econ traits at this stage aren't worth taking, but they can be if you already have a good combat augment and need a better economy. That said, if you really want to play it safe, the best option at this tier is either a combat augment that works with your current board, or future-proofing your board with a more late-game focused combat augment. Utility is also fine to go for at this stage. Again, we can't tell you what to take because every game is so different, but having a plan is always helpful. If your board is weak in stage 3, take an augment that helps boost your power right away to take less damage until you stabilize in stage 4. A player with high health can afford to take losses, so taking an augment that's beneficial later on is good to do. It all comes down to playing what you're comfortable with and what works best with the plan you have at this stage of the game. Stage 4 is where most players will be hitting their power spikes, whether that's by 3-starring their carry with a reroll board or finding a 4-cost carry to use. We do recommend rolling in stage 4 if you aren't playing a low-cost board, because fast 8, while viable, is risky to do. It's so common to see players not roll on level 7 and take a ton of damage in the first few rounds of stage 4. Then they're scrambling to avoid losing more health, level to 8, and don't hit and end up in the bottom 4. For this meta, rolling on 7 is fine to do. There are plenty of options such as Renata Bruiser, Socialite carries like Irelia, VIP Draven if you hit that, or the various reroll boards viable in the meta. Then you can always play flex with enchanters such as Oriana Clockwork, Morgana Frontline, or Senna Socialite. Jhin is also a decent flex choice. At the end of the day, you want to play a composition that fits your augments and items, and almost all the current compositions can stabilize in stage 4. That said, fast level 8 is fine to do if your board is already winning easily in stage 4. Major decision of the game is the 4-6 augment. At this point of the game, we recommend avoiding any econ augments unless you desperately need an injection of gold to survive the next few rounds. Otherwise, this tier is all about playing to your board's strengths. Any augment that functions well with your board or pairs with the previous augment should be the go-to here. Honestly, the 4-6 augment is usually the easiest decision because it's generally obvious what option is best. But as always, make sure you're scouting before committing to a choice. With that, we can move into the late game. Given the pace of the current meta and most of the 5 costs being a bit lacking, the game is less about hitting capped boards and more about playing to survive. Of course, cap boards do exist, such as Innovators, but the majority of the meta is about spiking in stage 4 and 5, then cruising into the top 4. Level 8 for most players won't happen until stage 5 unless they were Omega strong at stage 4 and took a risk, leveled anyway. Level 9, on the other hand, is not really feasible for most boards in the late game unless you've capped everything and still have a good economy to level with. There's also not as many power spikes at level 9 unless your board can use Silco and you haven't already put them in. In general, the focus should entirely be on scouting and positioning, especially the in-game combat tracker making it easier to do. Always positioning as effectively as possible every round. Sweating like that is the easiest way to bump up your average placement. That said, as we always say, the real way to climb rank and improve your average placement is to focus more on the early and mid game. Figuring out those stages of the game will almost always net you more gains than focusing on the late game. That's all for today's video, folks. Considering the amount of high-ranked players that have been gloomy about Neon Knights, we want to take a moment to point out that you can take breaks from TFT. If you don't enjoy a meta or set, come back later. TFT is always evolving, so a few weeks or even months away can make all the difference. Even now, we're seeing more positive reaction to the 12.4b patch. Let us know in the comment section below what you've enjoyed the most so far in set 6.5. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.